What's up?
Hey Joe, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Yeah, I was wanting to meet in person, but I don't know. We live in the same city, but it's easier said than done sometimes. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, that's cool. How things been?
We've been very good. Enjoying, although it's a little cold right now here in Utah.
It is. It is.
But I escaped to Mexico for a week. That was nice.
Congrats.
Get a little warmth in there. But no, things have been going great, and just excited at some of the things happening in the data space right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll get into that. But before we get into that, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Well, I've been in the data space for 20 plus years. I think my biggest claim to fame was that in 2014, I joined a little startup named Snowflake. I was
Mm,
employee 49, and it was really exciting to be kind of at the pivot of that. I started as a sales engineer, actually was in Seattle at the time. And so selling to customers there. And then I moved uh, both role and location to Utah, and the role then being the essentially the ecosystem tech lead. So
yeah,
the technical architect. And so I worked with all kinds of companies across Snowflake's ecosystem from Tableau to Fivetran to Looker to Matillion and really kind of helped build all that out. And after 5 years, I was kind of exhausted. So I took a little break and then came back with ThoughtSpot for a little while and Elation. So I've never really left the ecosystem.
yeah.
And it's been a great run though.
That's a great run. Now you're at a new company.
Yeah, I just joined Revify a couple months ago. We can,
Cool.
you know, definitely something we can talk about a little bit,
Yeah.
but exciting to continue in this space of these data platforms.
That's dope. So walk me through the early days. I mean, I think you were at Amazon before you were at Snowflake as well.
Yeah.
And I know we get lunch often, and yeah, I mean, it sounded like some pretty gnarly data problems
Yeah,
back in the day.
Amazon has crazy data problems. Well, when you think about it, business processes generate data, and no business process generates more data than e-commerce. Well, maybe social media, but we'll get to that because at Amazon we needed the social media data as well in order to understand our customers. So I ended up I hired into the mobile shopping team, but what we really cared about was what you would call marketing. We called it traffic. So website traffic and I mean data volumes were insane. Petabyte scale data coming in every day, identifying devices. That was for me being in the mobile shopping, device identification was really important. And it shocked me when I saw the process they were using for device identification. It was Hadoop. It was great, but pattern matching to because devices send all kinds of crazy things. Funniest story I have out of that was they launched the Fire Phone. You may remember the infamous Fire
Yes,
Phone.
very successful.
And so a week, and this is part of why it was probably not successful, was a week after they launched, they came to me and said, "Hey, can you show us what traffic is coming from the Fire Phone?" And
Okay.
I was like, "You should have been asking me this question like months ago." And Amazon's a crazy place, and most of the time they're really focused on data. But in that case, they just missed the boat on pre-preparing the data. So just like any other mobile phone, we had to parse the data out for the Fire Phone. We didn't have a back end to know what traffic was coming from there, and it just typical problems that business users sometimes don't think about when then they're like, "Hey, I want to know what data is being generated." You got to think about that ahead of time most often to get the best results.
Mm, that's fascinating because yeah, everything I know about them, they're very data driven. I never worked there. I got a lot of friends that work there, but it seems like yeah, definitely seems like a miss. Are there? I guess you've been around the block a bit. How would you go? Are there best practices for I guess setting up, tracking things like a fire? Like how would you have done this?
Yeah, no, I mean, you definitely want to work with engineers, and that was one of the advantages that we had was that we worked for the VP who managed all the engineers that built the mobile experiences at Amazon, and so we spent a lot of time uh, working with them, trying to figure out the best way to prepare the data. Now, the thing I'll always remember about Amazon is I showed up for my first day of work as a BI engineer in that mobile shopping group. And my boss, who was not a technical person, she's a very smart person, very good manager, but she was a product manager. So not super technical. She understood technical things, but she put on my desk a 3-inch stack of papers that were the business case of that department. And because in order for me to do data work, I needed to understand what kind of questions did they want to know. One of the
Mm,
questions that kept coming up was for ad buys of the Amazon app. You think about, how are you getting people to shop? And then the question becomes, do shoppers become better shoppers with a mobile app versus online, versus a PC experience? And so we spent a ton of time trying to refine that. And Amazon, if you've never heard this, they're huge into A/B testing.
yeah.
Everything, like their website, you're going to go one day, it's going to look completely different than another day. And what it probably is not that they've made a change, is that they're thinking about making a change. And so we worked very closely with the engineers to make sure that when they did that A/B testing, that we were set up and instrumented for the right data analysis afterwards in order to properly understand the data. And that's, I mean, anytime you're working with data, it's really a question of, what business questions are you trying to answer?
Hmm.
And then tying those into things that you can get. And the other thing that shocked me was that I had a coworker who would always go into meetings with the VP and he'd say, "No, we can't do that." And I said, "We're
Okay.
Amazon. We could do anything." And it became down to a matter of, we needed to, obviously we had limited resources, strangely enough, at a big company like that. But we had to focus on what was most important. And again, it came down to business questions as much as anything. So as technical as we get, at the end of the day, if we're not driving value for the business and the decisions being made, then why are we here?
Mm. It's a tough lesson for a lot of technicians, though, and it usually isn't conveyed until you learn it the easy way or the hard way, I guess. So,
Yeah, and I came from a data, actually a software engineering background. Now I was always working with data. I was fortunate enough that I was studying at BYU and I took the database class, and our professor would give us these challenges, SQL brain teasers.
oh,
And
fun.
it kind of got me to think in a way, set-based theory, and think about things. So every job I had, I kept getting put on I shouldn't say stuck because I enjoyed it, but I kept getting put on the data projects as a Java engineer. A lot of JDBC, a lot of interacting with databases. And then, finally, I moved over into actual business intelligence and made the pure plunge right into just directly working with the data. And again, I use my Java, sometimes I'm using SQL, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to what business problems can we solve. And I think like that's the biggest challenge for technical people because
Yeah,
they want to write a cool AI bot or do something really innovative around data. And it's like, well, what business question are you solving?
bingo. That's exactly it. So after that, you went to this little startup, um, Snowflake, I think it's called.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
It was wild. You're working at Amazon. They'd moved my family up there, and I started talking to them, and they gave me a demo of the architecture. And I
this
was
is
just like,
Snowflake, or
I was in Seattle. I
okay,
moved so I was in Salt Lake, actually working for Domo, and Amazon recruited me up, pulled me up to Seattle, and I was in Seattle. I'd been there a year and a half, and I was actually enjoying, like, for all the horror stories about Amazon, I loved it.
that's cool.
But something about this guy that I talked to, he ended up being Steve Herskovitz. He was the VP of sales engineering, and I saw his demo, and I'm like, this is different. This is game changing. In fact, my experience at Domo had taught me that the cloud was very different, and
Hmm.
that was when I recognized. And so I'm like, go to my wife and I say, I'm going down to San Mateo for an interview. And she's like, well, we're at Amazon. You're going to stay at Amazon for 30 years, right? And I'm like, we'll see. So I met Bob Muglia. And Bob, I don't know if you've had the pleasure
He's a
of
good
meeting
dude.
Bob.
I've met him. Yeah,
He's amazing. I met with Bob. I met with the founders, Benoit and Thierry. And something there just told me these are the people you need to work with.
mm,
And so I took the plunge. jumped out of the safety of Amazon. I guess you can relative safety because Amazon's a competitive place, but
Yeah.
made the leap and cloud data warehousing. We kept wondering if data warehousing was the wrong term because was there really enough money in data warehousing for what we were trying to build? And I feel like we really shifted the entire industry.
Well, and I think for the audience, it's worth remembering this was around the big data era where I heard conversations. I don't know about you, but like data warehousing was dead. Hadoop was going to take over. Don't need to know SQL. That's dumb. Learn Java or
Yeah, go
Python,
learn
right? So
Python.
it's
And
yeah,
by the way, learn Python, but but
yeah.
not for the reasons that they needed you to. And that was really it. Is like what you saw was two different systems evolving, and one was dying. The data warehouse, as great as Teradata was too expensive, and it couldn't deal with things. And so, we would visit with early on in the Snowflake days, we would go visit Nike, and it's been long enough that I can share some of this because it's not under NDA anymore. But Nike had a very well-run Teradata system, but they were augmenting it with Cloudera because they had data volumes that just wouldn't fit in Teradata.
Hmm.
And we saw this over and over repeated pattern. And then by bringing those two systems together into a cloud data platform, and the lake house is such an interesting term because Databricks has kind of latched onto it. But I really feel like all these platforms created this idea of a data warehouse that scales beyond what was ever possible before.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and those are the days too. I kind of see Redshift as the first inning of that whole, cloud-based OLAP analytical systems. I'll never forget what the announcement of Redshift, for example. That was what 2012, November 2012. It was like you could rent a data warehouse for 25 cents an hour, and it was like that's cool.
Well, I
That's
was at Domo and we'd already started playing with BigQuery because
oh yeah,
BigQuery
that
actually
that
came
was
out
out.
before
That was
Redshift.
you're right. Actually, that was it was before. But Google couldn't explain what it was. I was just like,
Right. It was a
what the
science. It was a science experiment. It was really expensive.
yeah.
And then you're right. Redshift came along and it's like, okay, now I can do this. And it's really interesting because it's built on a technology called ParAccel.
Hmm.
And we ended up dealing with ParAccel people down the road. They turned into Matrix was their product. They ended up being acquired again. But yeah, I mean, it was such a groundbreaking thing. And I remember I was talking to a high up at I was not in the AWS team. I used a lot of AWS services at Amazon. When I was leaving for Snowflake, I talked to one of the marketing leaders at AWS who reported directly at the time to Andy Jassy.
Oh,
And I said, I'm going to a company that separates storage and compute. And he said, well, everybody's doing that.
okay.
And and I said, well, I think this one's a little bit different. And it turned out it was different, but that was it, is the cloud really opened this door of separating storage and compute and allowing you to store just immense amounts of data at a low cost.
Yeah.
Where, storage arrays and all this on-premise mess that people had to deal with for years suddenly kind of melted away. And obviously the companies are still on-prem. That architecture hasn't gone away completely, but man, it's just seen such a massive shift to the cloud.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And it was interesting the BigQuery you brought up. That was interesting because I was talking with Jordan Degani about this, who created BigQuery, and he said it was
Yeah.
hard at Google to hire people. If you mentioned data warehousing, nobody was like, "No, I don't want to work on that." Like, no, like that's like why?
Yeah,
So
I got
it
to
had
know
to be something
Tino, who was
different.
very close with
Oh
Jordan
yes, Tino.
at
Yep.
a time, and we talked a lot about that. As we actually tried another startup a few years later after Snowflake called
Mm,
Firebolt.
yep.
But again, like very interesting to hear the stories of the early days of BigQuery and like Snowflake. I think the real thing that carried Snowflake through was the vision of Benoit Dageville,
Yeah.
the founder, because he had been at Oracle. He helped build Oracle RAC and then Exadata. And,
Hmm.
he really wanted to build that vision in the cloud. And it was really, once he came to understand what S3 was,
Yeah.
just opened a door that he could do this miracle of multiple compute nodes sitting on top of the same S3 bucket. And again, multiple buckets at some point, but multiple compute nodes being able to process that same data at the same time.
Oh
and
yeah.
not run into contention. And that was really what we started selling very quickly once I got into the field and was selling Snowflake. That was where we were pushing, was all around concurrency and allowing all the different teams within your business to run their jobs without interfering with each other.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure you know a lot more about this than I do because you work there. But that original Snowflake paper, the white paper that came out, like that was cool. Like
Oh
it was
yeah, no,
clear
and
that
that
was visionary for sure.
that was wild. So the interesting thing was I'd actually interviewed um, at Mark Logic before
Oh
I came to Snowflake. Interestingly enough, like an old blast from the past. And they had like a 78-page paper that described, and it was brilliant paper, but it was so complex. And then to see, I get to Snowflake and a couple months in, they did this. It was at Sigma, the database. It was an academic paper, and it was 12 pages. And
yep.
it just kind of explained everything that we were doing in such a refined and you know, succinct way that it just kind of blew people's minds at the time.
Hmm. Yeah, like micro partitioning, like that was
Oh, that that
clever.
was that was a brilliant idea. So many databases were trying to, let you tune, and that's really the battle now as we move into the iceberg age, as we, they how do you reproduce some of the things where Snowflake would just tell you, like, Snowflake was a lot like Apple. We're gonna set the size. Don't worry about it. We've got it under control. Just create a table, put some data into it. You don't have to think about partition size, and that message compared to like Cloudera, which was a whole nightmare
Oh,
of
I've used that before. Yep.
Zookeeper and a million different parts and your file system and all that. And what's great now is that we're seeing those merge together with Iceberg, where it's not as demanding to to design a flexible architecture.
Right. That's definitely true. Um, so what are your thoughts these days? I mean, we're kind of jumping around a bit, but welcome to the Joe Reese show. Um, data platforms, right? So, we went from kind of covered the vast array, probably skipped a few things along the way, but went from on-prem, you got BigQuery, you got Redshift, you got Snowflake, you mentioned Iceberg today with Lakehouse. Um, what are your thoughts on the current data platform ecosystem?
Well, it's interesting because you compare Snowflake, where the vision was a cloud data warehouse, right? An expandable, scalable, moving beyond the traditional data warehouse. And then you look at Databricks, and a great company, great leadership,
Hmm.
but they started as a better way to process data. Obviously, Spark was a huge improvement from MapReduce. As a Java
Yes.
engineer, I would always play with the MapReduce stuff, and it was like I could get it if I ever sat down and really worked at it, but it wasn't obvious. And again, there were all these other side pieces that you needed to know. And
Yep.
Databricks has done a great job of kind of simplifying the deployment of Spark in a way that it works for most organizations. And now it really comes down when you're thinking about like comparing the two. And obviously they've moved into each other's space, but to me it's one is SQL based. Snowflake is still SQL based, and yes, Databricks has a SQL function that's getting better and better, and I'm hearing great things about it. But
Hmm.
but the other is procedural. It's Python, and yes, you can run Python against Snowflake as well. But the idea is really, are you trying to do procedural work, or are you trying to do set based math? Essentially SQL is a set based operation to identify a certain type of record that you're looking for. And
Hmm.
so to me, as a programmer, I always want to look at that procedural stuff and say, hey, procedural is great, but then like I said, I think for many organizations it's a lot easier to kind of use SQL to manage the data you have.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely felt like it's a collision course coming from basically two opposing ends of the data spectrum. Like I started using what 2014 and Databricks shortly thereafter, and it was a great experience. But it was a data science platform at the time, right? And that's more of my background was doing that kind of stuff. I accidentally fell into data engineering, like
Well,
some
and I
pretty
remember
dumb
in your
stuff.
book, I remember in your book, you kind of said, yeah, it was the data science. You realized that in order to enable the data science, you needed the data engineering. And I think that's really where you saw Databricks move was, as much as they were enabling data science,
Hmm.
people had to prepare the data.
Turns
And
out,
then,
yeah.
and once it's prepared, then the question is, well, in addition to these data science jobs that are very complex, and it was interesting because at Amazon, they are the kings of machine learning. Like they use
Oh,
machine
yeah.
learning on almost every data set that they have. And to move from that and see that in addition to that machine learning, you still need SQL because you still have basic questions that you want to answer, like how much revenue did we make last year? Like that's still something that's really important to answer. Um, so it becomes very interesting to see how you build out a data team.
Yeah, yeah, and that's changed too. It used to, I think, back in the day, I guess depending on the company you're at, right? But it was back, I think, pre-data scientists, it was ETL developers, analysts, so forth. Data science days in the 2010s, it was well, you just hire data scientists. What do you need everyone else for? And you quickly realized that was probably a bit of a mistake, but that was the trend for the first part. And now it's I think it's starting to gel a bit more. What do you think is there an ideal data team archetype, or what are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
I think number one is again, you've got to have somebody on that data team that's focused on the business, that understands the business in a real deep way, and that understands, it's not just about putting a number on a dashboard or on a piece of paper. Uh, One of the interesting things that I learned again, I learned a lot of stuff at Amazon. Every report that I wrote for a VP or above was a Word document. And yes, they'd have charts
Um,
that we would embed in them, but like they wanted more insight than just sheer numbers. And so I think your team needs to have that. I kind of felt bad as I was leaving Amazon. The VP called me over the weekend and he said, "I saw you put in your notice." And I'm like, "Well, I'm going to Snowflake, and no, you're not going to be able to talk me out of that one." But he said he was going to put together the dream team, and it was one of my favorite people who was a business leader. He was one of the sharpest business guys that I knew at the time. And he was going to run the business side, and I was going to run the data side, the data engineering essentially side. And they were bringing in an economist
oh,
from, I think, from Minnesota or something. And he said, "I've got this." It's like, it would have been nice if you told me your plans before I started talking to Snowflake. But that I think kind of led me down this path of saying you want a really sharp business guy that either manages your data team or is part of your data team. Again, kind of how that works. You want a system thinker who can think about how do all the pieces fit together. And then I think you want a big thinker like an economist that says, like, what are the questions we aren't asking? And how do we get that data? I spend a lot of time with investors at times giving advice, and they're always looking for an edge. And it's like sometimes I wish our business teams would have as much desire to get that little edge that
hmm.
our data engineering teams, because a, a lot of times there's stuff that we just can't anticipate that's going to come out in the data, but we have to think big about it. So, and what's great is if you build that team right, you can develop your own talent internally because you're bringing in smart people. It's not like, your data engineer is not smart enough to learn the business stuff. It just hasn't had that opportunity. And so you kind of cross train your people and it really builds that knowledge. Now, I think the other piece that was missing from the team that I was talking about that I would add now is really that AI piece,
Yeah,
is somebody who really understands the AI. And again, like I can learn AI and pretty much any engineer can learn it, but somebody who really kind of grasps what the concept is and understands kind of how to deploy it at scale.
yeah. What do you think AI does to data platforms? Kind of going back to that.
Well, I think, going back to the days of like SPSS versus SAS, right? Two technologies from the 80s that kept going. SAS had a lot of legs. I remember I actually went to their headquarters in Cary, North Carolina when I was
Yeah,
in Snowflake, to talk to them about how we could work together. And I think the ability to predict what's going to happen is still really, really valuable. And as much as AI can get pointed at, agentic AI to do different tasks and, conversational AI and everybody kind of over-indexed, I think, on large language models, which are a great feature, but like at the end of the day, one of the key powers of AI is that predictable, being able to make predictions that don't have hallucinations
Mm,
and because ultimately, and it's funny, I came across this at Corda, was the idea of the OODA loop. I don't know if you've ever
hmm
talked about that. But yeah, it was a military term. It was observe, orient, decide, and act. And then loop and observe what happened when you acted. And if you can get your loop inside of your opponent, you win in military and in business. And I think that's one of the reasons why Amazon was able to beat so many of the brick and mortar retailers was because they were able to integrate or iterate faster and observe their situation and make actions that move the needle.
hmm Yeah, I mean, you still hear not as much anymore, but definitely like Amazon moves like a startup, I think is the
Yeah,
common
it's always day
comment,
one.
right?
Their headquarters building is always called day one. It was funny because while I was there, they actually moved day one from one building to another. But yeah, they want to be a startup. I think at scale that's tough. A lot of companies have tried to kind of replicate even with some of the people from Amazon. I think they haven't been as successful because I think Amazon has a unique blend. Now, it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see if at some point they split off the AWS stuff from the retail. But yeah, it's definitely a great place to kind of get your business degree.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. I've heard it's tough, but there's no other place like it if you want to learn. So,
Yeah, and I think for a data engineer, who's trying to wonder, how do I get to, I work for a small company in Springville because my wife was expecting our second when I graduated and I didn't want to move. I started with a newspaper company and spent 5 years there. And then I caught on to Corda, which became Domo because one of my friends moved there. And it really moved me into this whole new world. And, at a certain point, I had to make that decision of am I going to go to Amazon? And that it's almost like, you always hear the quote, if somebody offers you a seat on the rocket ship, you don't say, I want to be by the window.
right.
You just jump in and you do what you can. And so I learned so much from so many people across my career that it really has helped me get to a place where I could contribute at a company like a Snowflake in those early key days.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too, sort of jumping from Amazon to Snowflake. What was Snowflake like in the early days?
It's funny, Bob Mugley he'd run the server and tools business at Microsoft. So basically reporting to Steve Ballmer at the time.
Yeah.
And my first day, he puts his arm around me and he says, "How was your day? And do you have a buddy?" And I think they built a culture, but at the heart of that culture was the fact that they had a technological vision that they were implementing, and we were all together in that. And we knew as a sales team, as I was a sales engineer at the time, so not directly selling, but supporting other sellers, that if we didn't come up with these deals, like it was going to stop the whole thing. And so we all worked together. And I have more experiences where I needed something fast for an opportunity, and our engineering team just came through with flying colors. And that's really what I think differentiates the great companies from the ones who may struggle at times is just that ability to get things done in the early stages
hmm
and not people aren't looking for credit. People aren't looking to, obviously there's a financial benefit if we all win together.
Right.
But I don't think in those early days anybody was sitting there going, this is my ticket to get rich. We were all thinking, what can I do to contribute?
For sure. And well, I don't think the success of Snowflake was as evident probably back then as it is today in hindsight. So, and what I do notice about Snowflake employees today is it more is about kind of the looking at the stock options or whatever the stock price
Well,
is those days.
and
So
stage
it's
companies go
yeah,
through stages,
for
right?
sure. Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing is, and I as much as I feel like I hit a home run with Snowflake, I've struck out too in my career, and you know,
Happens.
it's really about, I think I've never gone back after a decision and regretted the decision because I've always learned. Like, they talk about you win or you learn. And I've learned a ton, not just from the companies and not from, mistakes that we've made, but from people who were really smart and really good at things that we just missed something along the way. And Snowflake got very lucky. I think the timing was tremendous there, but it's really my belief is if you keep working with smart people, like success will come
Yeah.
as long as you're not just there for the ride. I've known a few people who like they want to latch themselves onto smart people and just ride their coattails. And it's like you need to contribute. You need to find a way to, it may not be what you expect. I think, coming out with a CS degree, I don't think I expected myself to end up in more the, I guess I'm kind of in the middle of technical and sales, but I'm
Yeah.
not writing any code. Uh, I never would have, go back to me 20 years ago and asked if I'd be happy doing that, but I couldn't be happier.
That's so cool. Well, and that's also smart people notice these things too. I mean, they'll notice if people aren't pulling the weight or if they're just kind of hanging on and kind of grifting, right? And at least I don't know, people like you or me would probably notice.
Yeah,
So,
that ability is a really important ability, and I'll tell you just an interesting story. So, Snowflake was really hard for certain regions. Europe was tough.
mm,
Even the Midwest was really tough. And we had a sales team there that fought tooth and nail and just couldn't get any results for the first couple of years. And I still remember
interesting.
when they announced that that team had hit their quota for the first time. And having, for the sales leadership to have the confidence in those guys to stick with them when, other leadership may have pushed them out the door
Yeah.
because they weren't producing to the level of other people. But it's understanding, who's pulling their weight, and you can tell that when you somebody comes into a meeting and they ask really smart questions, and they know what the challenges are as well as anybody, then you know that they're not sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah. That's key. So I mean, I remember getting pitched on Snowflake way back in the day, like 2016, I think. It was way back in the day now. And it was interesting because I felt like it was almost too easy, right? So that was well, it was I think what like actually caught me off guard. It's like that's it. Um, like there has to be something
Yeah,
more to this. Well, and the engineer and he's like, well, where are the heroics that I can do?
right.
So
When I always tell the story, we were sitting in a room at a very large company, and it was a room full of DBAs that had run a Teradata practice. And they said, well, like, what is there for us to do? We'd presented it. And it was funny because before I was formulating a response, and the boss stood up, the manager of this team, and said, I've got so many things for you guys to do. Like, your jobs are not at risk because of Snowflake.
mm,
And I think the only people that I ever saw who really suffered with Snowflake were the ones who just couldn't adjust. So one of my jobs at Snowflake was to train consultants on Snowflake. And I trained thousands of people. I actually wrote the first Snowflake uh, certification exam. So you can
I
blame
think
me
I
if it
took
was
that
too hard.
actually. Yeah.
Anybody can pick on me. I'm the one you can throw the tomatoes at.
It was
But
pretty easy actually, Todd.
yeah, I'm glad you found it.
I'm
Well, that's for a reason, Joe. You were the target audience. But one of the things I found was just that people wanted to stick to what they knew.
Yeah.
They would stick to these concepts, and there were certain concepts that just didn't make sense in Snowflake. It didn't make any sense to have multiple versions of a table because of the way that Snowflake
Yep.
partitioned the data. It was easy. Like, you didn't have to have a this week table and a this month table or a month by month table. Like,
Yep.
you didn't need that. It just wasn't something that you needed. And so for those who were kind of stuck in the past, they probably ended up out, they were the only ones who really would lose anything to the new model. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that was the beauty of Snowflake, and I liken it to Apple in that it just works.
Mhm. Just work. And the thing is, back in the day, I think one of the keys to success was the Snowflake sales team knew how to talk to enterprise. Um, at least as far as I could tell, right? They kind of just knew what people wanted to hear and wanted to work with. Whereas
Well,
other companies, I don't know, I didn't get the impression, but maybe you have some other insight into
I
this.
can attest that the sales guys learned a lot.
Okay,
They were the guys that I worked with, uh, nothing but respect for these guys. They listened in those meetings. So when a meeting would go bad, they would listen. And we had our share of bad meetings.
sure.
But the key was learning. And that's, one of the things that I learned about, and there's a great book on this about learning mindset, is that, and this is my advice to anybody in any field, and especially data engineering because it moves so fast, is that learning mindset, that idea of always being able to continue to learn is the most important skill in life. Learning, like they ask, what's the most important skill? It's like learning is a skill and it's super important. And being able to listen and in a sales context to listen to what a customer's telling you they don't like about your product and either going back and getting the product team to work on that or figuring out a different way to message around that was critical in selling this new vision of how companies would run their data.
Hmm.
And you have two ears and one mouth for a reason. So use your ears more and listen. And like I said, I think that's been my biggest finding is like listening to smart people is never a waste of time.
Nope. But one of the criticisms that Snowflake gets right now, and other platforms, cloud data platforms, is cost. Um, and so I think this may lead into what you're doing now, but this is back in the ZIRP days, 0% interest rates. Cloud bills were, yeah, whatever, spend as much as you want. It doesn't matter. Get 20 or 30 tools while you're at it too, because why not? And
Well,
now that's changed. So
yeah, and I mean the cloud's changed this all over. I still remember I was at Domo and they would tell us every time we needed something, like a service or something, oh, just spin up an EC2 instance. And then one day they're like, stop spinning up EC2
yeah, but
instances because it just the bill came due and it's so easy to get there with these pay-as-you-go systems. And there's whole companies that have sprung up around managing your AWS costs. And that's I actually don't find the cost management itself as interesting. I joined Revify because actually they'd moved beyond just cost management. But like to me, it's about optimizing your use. And so it's asking those questions. And it's really like whether you're an engineer spinning up a service or whether you're a data engineer trying to build a new process, you should always think about the cost. And I think, you know, in the early days, the really smart engineers that were working on Teradata would recognize every job I write is going to cost in terms of concurrency. Now, is there a bill due for that? No. But as you move to the cloud, you've just got to think about every job. And do I really need to update my data every day or every hour? Or
mhm.
could I update it once a day? And when you think about a cloud resource, and this applies to everything, BigQuery, Databricks, Snowflake, you know, if you can minimize the output, the cost while maximizing the effectiveness,
Hmm.
then you're really onto something. And that's really, the message that I kind of want to get out into the world, whether it's representing Revify or not, it's be mindful of these things. And really these cloud platforms require a different mindset than the previous platforms.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. I remember one company I won't name were a client of ours, and they had just got Snowflake, and I don't think they read the instruction manual. So they started bombarding Snowflake with just, you know, direct inserts, and then we're just doing some sort of merge update or something. And they were like, I think they went through like 10% of their credits in a week,
Yeah.
the annual credits. And CFO, I know was pissed. He's like, if you can't fix this soon, I'm gonna fire all of you.
Yeah.
Get it
Well,
done.
and sometimes, interestingly enough, for a vendor, you're like, oh man, I can't believe my customer did this because now it's going to cost me. I still remember uh, there's a specific story. I can't give the name of the customer, but I was working for a customer and I wrote an ETL job that fixed something and it cost $1,700 in credits. But that job saved them thousands of dollars per day.
Awesome.
And it was funny because uh that, they just that mindset of, look, if I'm going to go in and I'm going to optimize my process, it may take me some time to optimize because I got to learn. And I think, what is exciting to me is now you've got these platforms and, you know, there's lots of them out there, but that are looking at that query history and understanding and using pattern and matching. So it's not just a human looking at it going, well, I think this is the best way to go, but it's recognizing, a little bit of work up front to run these jobs and to figure things out the right way can save you so much money down the road. And, I think as companies start to think that way, it really saves them from massive cloud spend bills.
Oh, big time. Yeah. But and I wish, yeah. I mean, it's sort of the broader thing you're seeing too is like cloud repatriation now. I think DHH from Basecamp was I think he's been very vocal and very public about it, right? Where bought a bunch of racks, moved off the cloud. Now we're saving a bunch of money and stuff. I think people are looking at this as sort of a broad generalization that cloud's expensive, and that you should just get your own server racks and stuff and move back to
Yeah, their
on-prem. So
workloads. I still remember. I think it was Dropbox, like moved a bunch of stuff on
yeah,
prem. They were managing file systems, the very predictable workloads. They
yep.
knew when they were going to expand. I think like I've yet to see, I see lots of cases for data repatriation. I think the thing that I haven't seen yet is and again, this is across all the platforms, so not just specific to Snowflake, but I haven't yet seen a case for a, other than just the cost of moving if you're already on it, of starting on-prem with like a Teradata today. And not to pick on Teradata.
Hmm.
They're great technology,
Yeah.
helped a lot of people get their answers from their data, but like I couldn't see any reason to put a data warehouse or data lake on-prem. Uh, I mean, even Cloudera is starting to recognize that cloud is probably the way for most of their customers to go.
Which they have the word cloud in it. I was like, why aren't you on
Yeah, that was the most confusing thing to me for years.
Yeah.
Was I went to Snowflake and we're talking to the guys at Cloudera and I'd seen Cloudera and I knew what it was. I'm like, and they don't run in the cloud? Like, how did somebody miss that? And again, I mean, it's really thinking about the shift in cloud. What was cloud? Cloud back then was a fungible resource, whether it was on-prem or somebody else's cloud. And, public cloud has now become the standard. But yeah, it's really interesting to think about their name and, where they landed.
What do you think happens with the data platform war going on between Snowflake and Databricks? How do you see this playing out?
I I think, I mean, right now Databricks is ahead. For all the love that I have for Snowflake and the history that I have there, like Databricks is ahead. They've really been able to get AI moving a lot faster than Snowflake has. I think they're, again, that it's that idea of programmatic, functional programming versus SQL. And there's a lot of cases, especially with data transformation, that the functional programming is just superior in a lot of ways. And Snowflake just hasn't managed to get that same adoption. But I think at the end of the day, all these companies are going to keep growing. Now, whether they meet the investors' expectations, I don't think about the market as much as I
Right.
think I think more about technology and what's interesting to me in technology than like where we're going from a market perspective.
Sure.
But like I think no business has an excuse now to not jump into data. And from the smallest company to anybody who's in e-commerce, obviously there's just tons of data around there. But as these mobile devices become ubiquitous, as people are, you know, online doing all kinds of activities online. Those systems are generating tremendous amounts of data, and every business can benefit. And I
Hmm.
think at the end of the day, everybody's going to end up having a cloud data platform. Now, does somebody come along with a more efficient, you had Presto was supposed to be more efficient than Spark, but then, Databricks added this Photon engine and, you know, that seems to be outperforming Presto. There's lots of different things that may shift over time. And any of these companies could kind of obsolete themselves by not adapting to the market.
Yeah.
But but at the end of the day, I think the rising tide lifts everybody. And these, like I said, I have not seen a real strong use case for keeping for new greenfield data to go on-prem. And so I just think the cloud data platforms are going to continue to grow and just expand. And you're going to see a new stack though arising. We talk about the dream stack of, a data platform, a BI tool, and an ETL tool, and the modern data stack, quote unquote. I think those are going to shift, and you're going to have things like optimization, like uh, operations, all those kind of things are going to continue to kind of rise up as customers really get to understand how to make the most of these platforms.
Right. What are your thoughts on sort of the other end of the spectrum, like the DuckDBs of the world? Um,
I love DuckDB. It's such an interesting thing because you can get started so quickly. And within Python, it's a great way to organize your data. Instead of a data frame, you can do a DuckDB. And it's like you don't need any infrastructure. Uh, Now, the one thing I haven't dug into is MotherDuck. I actually have a couple good friends there. But I'd be interested to see how they're leveraging that at scale. But I think if I was starting my data analytics journey, and maybe this is the one case where, it's not better than cloud, it's just easier and faster than cloud. Hey, I'd start with DuckDB. If I've got a spreadsheet and I want to go do some interesting analysis on it, start with DuckDB and, you know, don't worry about because it runs so efficient. I mean, that's the beauty of DuckDB is how efficiently it runs because, it was interesting. Comparable technology in a weird way is Alteryx because it
mm,
runs on your machine in the desktop mode. And Alteryx had the problem that once you got to the certain point, people were having to buy these crazy desktops to run their Alteryx jobs.
yeah, that's interesting.
And it's like suddenly your cost savings was eaten up by these expensive hardware problems. And so it's like, hey, if you can throw that to cloud, but if you don't have a scalability problem, DuckDB is a fantastic way to kind of analyze your data uh, in a super simple way.
Oh yeah, it's super simple, and it's optimized for single core, right? And then the laptops, for example, these days are ridiculous. Like I'm looking at even this old bugger. It's like a couple years old, but a 15-inch MacBook Air. This thing is plenty fast for most things, mostly browsing the internet. But
Yeah,
I run DuckDB on
exactly.
that, and I have a MacBook Pro, and I'm actually recording this in a Mac Studio. It's got like I don't even know how many cores this thing has. It's ridiculous, but yeah.
Well, it's wild how software will lend itself to whatever's out there. I still remember, in the 80s, my dad was an electrical engineer, so we had computers before most of our neighbors had them. And you're like looking at this computer we actually had a hard drive, 10 meg of hard
Whoa.
drive. And it's like, whoa, what would you ever do that you need more
But that was
than
pretty big
10
back
meg?
then, right? I mean, that was actually a lot of storage for.
That was a ton of storage. And it was, like it was so interesting to see it from that perspective as a kid and say, like, what would you ever do? And then, now the operating system alone eats up, hundreds of gigabytes often, in terms of different things that it's doing. And so, um, you know, the it's interesting to see, and obviously that's bringing us new functionality. Uh, but at the end of the day, business, like I said, not every business needs data. Not every business needs the same data.
Hmm.
And so,
What do you mean
if
by
you
that?
got, you can go get a razor and run inference on your laptop and, pick stocks that way. And if you're really good at writing, AI, then make a lot of money that way. I think at scale, when you get into inference, it gets a lot more complicated, but there's a lot you can do just on a single machine, depending on the use case.
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, a lot. There are supercomputers these days. Um, what are you excited about over the next couple years?
I really think it's how we use this data to improve the human condition. I still blows me away when I go to, Bangalore and see kind of in the conditions that some of the people live there in. And like I love it's a beautiful place to visit. Please visit it.
Hmm.
But like there are spots there, and even there are spots here in the States as well, like all over the world. And I still feel like there's this huge divide between those who know what to do with this data and those who don't. And so my hope is that we take all of this data, and maybe it's because I'm getting older and thinking about, the legacy and things like that. But I'd
Sure.
love to see this data for good, used for good to help people to get food to the right people in the right places, and maybe to fix our environment if we can.
Hmm. That's a big
And
one.
like I said, I think you're starting to see a lot of people in the data space, at least people that I know, that really want to make a change. And I think we have more power than any other generation to change the world.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one of the big focuses of my new company is focusing on education for kids. Actually, I think that's um, as I look at, the experiences my kids have in their public schools, good schools, but I think that they're not learning the things I think that they should be learning, which is
Yeah,
how to adapt to the 21st century, for example. Like that's
schools are behind, and some great teachers doing some great things. But yeah, I mean,
bless their
having
hearts.
raised
Yeah.
six kids myself, the youngest being 13, I look at these kids and they're amazing. Not just my kids' friends that I see just doing amazing things, and they've been raised on these technologies, and so they just get it.
Yeah.
They understand, and I think, as we move into the future, like they're going to come up with ideas that we never would have thought of. But again, like, to me, at the heart of it all is data. We have more data than we've ever had to
So
understand
much.
what's happening.
Yeah. That's good vision. Hopefully it's something you end up working on too. Maybe you are. I don't know. So
Yeah, not so
awesome.
much. I mean, obviously we do what we can in terms of uh, the companies, and we,
Yeah.
obviously we'd like to all contribute there. But I think, to be honest, it's going to take a lot of people just donating their time.
Yep.
And there's that time will come when my kids are out of school where I have a lot more freedom to do what I want to do. And I definitely think a big part of that will be helping the less fortunate of the world to find a way to leverage data to make their lives better.
That's super cool. Well, if you ever want a partner to help out that, let me know.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah, these are the kinds of
definitely.
things I'm really focused on right now. I think we're roughly the same age-ish and old at this point.
Starting to feel it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you start thinking about things like legacy, right? And I think uh, relatively, I think you and I are both pretty comfortable. We can make choices at this point, and so, and it's how do you want to spend your time? I think to help impact other people. I know that that's personally, and it sounds like that's what you want to do too. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's so wild. My wife and I were talking about this yesterday. Think about 50 years ago, we probably would have worked in a factory, every day for 8 hours a day. And now we get to work from home and, have these amazing computers and, work around the world and travel when we want to in very easy ways compared to the past. And again, it's like, hey, what can I do to contribute to leverage this ease of life that we've worked hard to get into, but how can I help those who probably don't even have any clue what a data warehouse is?
well, that's a lot of people. So, well, awesome. Well, thanks, Todd. It was great chatting with you. We'll have to get lunch sometime again. Gain 500 pounds in the process. So, yep.
Well, you gotta. I'm trying to watch what I'm eating,
You
but
are actually. I noticed we had lunch at this. We so for the audience, we went to a really good burger place, this biker bar of all places in Salt Lake City, notorious for their garlic burgers. And Todd gets the low carb option, so that was cool to see.
yeah,
So
trying to do my part to to, be healthy. And obviously that's can't really help other people if you're not helping yourself first.
This
So,
is very true. It's very true.
but it was great to talk with you, Joe, as
Yeah.
always. I always enjoy our conversations and
Yeah.
definitely, hopefully people will be able to see, uh, the power of these platforms and really we can bring them to kind of use them in the best ways possible.
Let's make it happen. For people who want to find out more about you, how can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Todd Beauchene. I'm going to be actually going to be posting a blog, not to self promote here, but I'm going to be
Go for
posting a
it.
blog about why I joined Revify. If you really have questions, please go to revify.com. Uh, it's an exciting small company with some people that I know from my previous experience that I have a lot of confidence in, and we're doing exciting things. But yeah, definitely look me up on Twitter and feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help anybody if they're whether it's career advice or data advice. I feel like it's time to give back.
That's awesome. Good for you, man. Cool. We'll see you around.
Okay, thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you.